when the chorus comes in and starts singing, "Come ye daughters of Jerusalem, come share my mourning," which is a text that comes from the Song of Songs, the most passionate, romantic book of the Bible. And extraordinarily, that's the source of those words from the famous and wonderful first chorus of Bach's St. Matthew Passion. I remember a conversation years ago with my old friend Anthony Payne, the composer who completed Elgar's Third Symphony and composed many wonderful pieces of his own. And we were talking about what we considered to be the pinnacle of the sort of Western classical canon. And I was putting forward a case for Beethoven's last string quartets. And Tony just said, well, really, when push comes to shove, it boils down to the St. Matthew Passion because there's no greater musical achievement than that. And he was kind of right. I remember hearing it years ago I suppose I would have been about 14, on the radio. I think Raymond Lepard was conducting. Any of you out there remember that performance? I think it was broadcast on the BBC, on BBC TV, in fact. And it was overwhelming to hear it, even as a teenager. And I remember my grandfather, who was an admiral in the Royal Navy, came to visit us that evening. And he was a classical music lover. And I remember saying to him, "Grandpa, I heard an amazing thing today, Bach's St. Matthew Passion. Do you know it?" And he said, "Oh, I'm not particularly into Bach. I much prefer Rachmaninoff." So before we go further into the St. Matthew Passion, welcome to the Music Professor channel. Today is Good Friday and we're talking about Good Friday music. I'm here with Loki. And I just decided quite spontaneously really to talk a little bit about Good Friday because perhaps of all days of the year, it has inspired some of the most amazing music of all. So I was talking about a performance I heard of the St. Matthew Passion as a teenager, but I've heard an amazing performance of it recently. We're very privileged to live near an annual event called the Stour Music Festival, which is an early music festival. And a couple of years ago, a wonderful, wonderful group called Solomon's Knot. And they performed it from memory. The vocalists were all singing from memory. The choruses consisted of soloists singing together. And there's an argument to be made that at least some of Bach's performances in St. Thomas's Leipzig, originally in the 1720s and 1730s, did have a small number of vocalists who just sang together as the chorus. And in this extraordinary performance, they went out into the congregation, the audience, whatever we were, kind of, you're both, aren't you? We were in a church and they came out and sang. It was incredible. So the storytelling was absolutely vivid. So Bach's St. Matthew Passion, why is it so incredible? Well, perhaps even in my attempt to play the wonderfully rich, dense harmony, polyphonic harmony that Bach generates on the very first page, you have something of an answer. And that's before the piece begins, it's just the orchestra playing. But there's that unbelievable sense of gravitas around it. But it also kind of dances, it has this wonderful energy, and you just sense in that music the pulse of the universe. You feel that inexorable journey towards the cross. He's taking you there, and it's fearless, and you're with him all the way. And what's so amazing, Bach is a great dramatist, so he sets the story as if you're there as a contemporary, as if you're in the crowd, as if you're one of the disciples, as if you're somebody on the edge of the crowd watching, as if, there's very much a contemporary feeling about it. And the chorus often sing terrible, terrible things. But you're also the community. You're also now, there's a subjectivity and an objectivity. You're also the community of faith, reflecting on events. And whether you're a believer or whether you're not a believer, you feel part of it. You feel part of that wonderful, immersive experience that Bach draws you into. And the music is astounding. I mean, the inspiration of each thing, the recitatives, this incredible storytelling that's going on. There's a guy who represents the evangelist, St. Matthew, is telling us the story. And that's like a kind of song cycle. If you take those recitatives, there's just incredible storytelling. And then coupled with all these beautiful arias which reflect on the text as they go along. And these chorales and these wonderful choruses. At the end of the journey, we don't end with the resurrection or anything. We end with the death of Jesus. And the final chorus is this incredible Sarabande of lament. Not content with giving us one world-shattering masterpiece for Good Friday, Bach wrote another Good Friday masterpiece that's pretty much as good. That's the St. John Passion. I mean, some people prefer it to the St. Matthew. I think of the two, I might say the St. Matthew is, because it's kind of the most extraordinary thing ever, but the St. John is astonishing too. And in fact, the beginning is one of the most incredible things anyone has ever composed. I mean, is anything more dissonant, more full of lament, yearning, extraordinary poignancy than the opening of the St. John Passion, where he has these oboes and flutes, like in stereo, wailing. There's a duet, one oboe and flute in duet with another oboe and flute over a kind of throbbing, dissonant thing going on, sort of swirling in the orchestra underneath, in the string orchestra underneath. Incredible, incredible noise. Very hard to play on the piano, but I'm going to have a go. That's where the chorus comes in. And again, rather like the St. Matthew Passion, builds towards that extraordinary moment where the chorus comes in with Herr, Lord. And you really sense Bach's absolute commitment to the story, a story in which he feels himself to be a part. Possibly in a few weeks' time we might do a session on chorale harmonisation. Bach is of course the miracle worker when it comes to harmony. For example, listen to this harmonisation of the great Passion Chorale. And there's one other Good Friday masterpiece I want to mention, and that is Wagner's Parsifal. Wagner wrote Parsifal in the 1870s, so about 150 years after Bach's Passions. And this is not the work of a conventional believer at all. For Wagner, I think the Christian story was essentially crucial symbols that represent things that tell us about ourselves. And it's his last opera. He composed it specifically for performance at the Bayreuth Festival Theatre, which he himself had constructed. And the work was meant to be performed as a sort of sacred play, almost like his equivalent of a kind of passion play, and that's very much what was in his mind, on Good Friday. So that was the whole conception. At the end of his life, I think Wagner very much had that sense, and it's a sense that we all have had when we've encountered the Bach Passions, is the thing I said at the beginning, that you've got a couple amazing music with this incredible story, where you're moving towards the cross, and the music is taking you there. So it's a kind of pilgrimage. And when music does this, something happens. Something happens that's kind of marvellous. A while ago, in one of the shorts, I said that one of the greatest concerts of my life was going to hear Messiaen's 20 regards sur l'enfant Jésus, the 20 visions of the infant Jesus, which also is a kind of pilgrimage. So there's something a bit special happens when you align a musical experience, a long-range musical experience, to a sort of spiritual journey, because you take an audience into something important. And if you're a good enough composer, if you can match real compositional depth with that depth of narrative, then you're going to end up with something incredible. And Wagner knew that. At the end of his life, he knew that this was the journey he needed to go on. And Parsifal is a piece I know very well because I've made a chamber orchestra version, which is going to be premiered. The whole opera is going to be premiered in Inverness in May. I guess this is by way of a kind of promotion, because in a moment I'm going to play a tiny bit of that version. But the whole opera begins with this wonderful theme that Wagner invented, almost like plain chant. You hear it as an orchestral unison, and you hear it in strings, low violins but also high cellos, and the melody is written in such a way that you have no idea what the rhythm is, but it reaches this high point there on the G. It has this slightly tragic fall in C minor, and then this lovely kind of hopeful tread upwards in A flat major, and then ends on C, on the median, because we're in A flat major here. So the melody itself goes on a kind of spiritual journey. It reaches a kind of cross at the centre. I think that's what this sort of is. It's like he's sketching out a cross shape at the centre of the melody. And you journey towards that apex, and then you have a kind of resurrection in that. I mean, this is incredible symbolism going on. This is the opening melody of the work. And that journey is also, to some extent, the journey of the opera, which I won't go into. And he orchestrates it in this beautiful way. So you have the strings, but then he mixes in clarinets and bassoons, and then at the intense centre of the melody brings in a cor anglais as well. And then Wagner does something wonderful, which is that he allows the orchestra to meditate on this theme, and he does it in the most wonderful way. He sets up this fantastic polymetric pulse in the woodwind, so they're all pulsing away in this dun 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 dun, kind of these slightly irregular throbbing patterns. The upper strings are playing these arpeggiated cross string patterns, and the melody, the Grundthema, the great theme that I've just played you, is then played on the trumpet, but supported by a pair of oboes, so you get that lovely glow of the trumpet plus the oboes. It gives you that wonderful, almost halo-like glowing sound. Also, the strings are divided between some strings playing arpeggios and others playing the melody with the trumpets. You get this wonderful kind of floating orchestration, absolutely extraordinary. There's a marvellous story about the conductor Carlos Kleiber conducting a rehearsal of Tristan and Isolde, in which the entire rehearsal was focused just on the opening cellos and the chord, and then the resolution, which isn't really a resolution, but it's just left there, and then the silence. So I don't know, there's probably an element of myth to this, that the entire rehearsal was taken up with that, but a good portion of the rehearsal was taken up with that. And then, of course, the performance just flowed out of the intensity with which they'd considered that opening. And I think my intention today is just to leave these openings with you. We've had the opening of the St. Matthew Passion, the St. John Passion, and the beginning of Parsifal. So 3 absolutely astounding masterpieces, all written for Good Friday at different times in history. And these openings tell you something about the great works that flow out of those openings. But you know, to be a composer of real genius, you have to set up at the start something that conveys the thing that's going to flow out of that starting point. And the genius is, there are two elements to genius here. One is to come up with the thing itself out of which everything's going to flow. And the other is just to sustain the inspiration over hours of musical invention, so that you just, there's never a flagging moment. The whole thing just sustains perfectly from that starting point. Well, these are quite deep things. Loki's here to tell me that he's had enough, and this is the end. So go away and listen to the St. Matthew Passion and the St. John Passion. And then if you've got time, have a listen to Marvellous Parsifal. And if you're in the Inverness area, come along to the Mahler Players, conducted by Thomas Leakey, with an all-star cast, including the great John Tomlinson, and they're going to be singing in Parsifal in May. And look up the details. Mahler Players, the details will be online. And the only other thing to say is, if you like the channel, please like and subscribe, press the little bell, and if you feel in a generous mood, please donate, because that's enormously helpful. And Loki's here to say thank you very much. You're a foolish beast.